Now, this week, climate change was chosen as the Children's Word of the Year following a survey of more than 5,000 UK children by Oxford University Press. Many respondents this year said the phrase climate change made them feel scared, sad and worried. The results were revealed in the same week that a new study from the Centre for Countering Digital Hate claimed that a third of teenagers believe climate change is exaggerated, thanks to a new type of climate denial online. So how should we talk to the next generation about climate change and the role it will play in their futures? We're asking, how worried should young people be about climate change? Joining us to discuss that are Day Zagaji, a climate activist and the founder of Extinction Rebellion Youth, Harrison Griffiths from Young Voices UK and the Institute of Economic Affairs, Inaya Folarin Iman, a journalist and broadcaster, and from Christian Climate Change, Melanie Nazareth. Welcome to you all. Good to see you all. Days, is it fair to say the findings of this report are because young people just feel hopeless? They feel bombarded by those messages of sadness when it comes to climate change. They are overwhelmed and scared, and that isn't a good thing, is it?
Yeah, I feel like young people are overwhelmed and scared. I personally was. I went through a whole portion of my life of where I just tried to pretend that it wasn't happening. And it's because deep down I actually felt like I had very little agency in it.
But what we're seeing is then they're becoming complacent about it because they just can't cope with it. They're overwhelmed.
Yeah, we haven't been taught how to actually manage our emotions, especially some of these big emotions as well. So it's a kind of moment of where, as an older person or as, you know, the older generation, we should be giving a hand to young people, making them feel like they have agency within the issue, which is totally true, but then also being able to hold these big emotions of grief that need to be held and tended to.
And the report suggests that there's a lot of misinformation online, and young people consume a lot of their news online, a lot more than older people. Should we be worried about complacency amongst young people because they're getting this information which perhaps isn't always correct?
Well, I would really question this idea of the kind of new type of climate denial. Actually, if you look at the study, many of the things that they are attributing to that are, for example, disagreeing with kind of key figures in the climate debate, or whether that's disagreeing with certain climate solutions.
Key figures as in people or numbers?
People.
People,
yeah. And I think that, you know, whether that could be whether Greta Thunberg or Roger Hallam, one of the founders of Extinction Rebellion. And so actually it's trying to essentially censor or demonise what is normal political discussion. Many climate activists oppose nuclear. Some support it. This is part of the differences of debate. And I think that when you actually have a situation where you demonise all criticism of particular policies and particular ideas in the discussion, then people are going to go, actually, well, this is probably exaggerated. This is just a bit silly, because you're not actually having a sensible, level-headed conversation about it.
But that idea of misinformation, someone like Jordan Peterson, who could be considered one of these people, he's got 7.6 million subscribers. Yeah. If he's powerful, whatever you say, but if he's putting out information that's not correct...
Well, I think Jordan Peterson, he's an emeritus professor of, I think, the University of Toronto. He's also done lots of work in Oxford universities. I think this idea that he is this type of, you know, hate figure that nobody can listen to his views, I just don't think is accurate. OK,
Melanie, you're a mother of four. How difficult is it to balance that feeling of making young people feel aware of, say, climate change, but not scaring them?
It's a really, really difficult balance. So I think that young people are rightly worried, very worried and scared about the future, because I disagree with Inaya there. I think that there is a lot of disinformation, things that are not factually correct circulating on the internet. And I think young people are drawn to that because I think there is this sense of overwhelming fear, which makes you want to look away from the problem and look to something that is easier to manage. And what we need to do is both face the reality and the truth of what's happening, but also to look at how we can act. And we can act, and we need to give young people this sense that they're not powerless, that they can do something about it, and they need to see the adults in their lives, the politicians, their teachers, their parents. They need to see us act on it, act on the actual truth of the matter as if it was true.
Yeah. Harrison, I was looking over the Oxford Children's Word of the Year over the years. So in 2014, it was Minion, you know, that little yellow character. And now it's climate change. I mean, that sort of gives you an idea of what children are thinking about, how it's changed over the years. But it is good that they're thinking about world issues, you know, social issues, things that are going to affect us.
It's good that people are thinking about these things, but I don't think we ought to frighten people into believing that unless we turn the clock back on the global economy to the year 1750, that there is a climate apocalypse coming their way. It's not healthy, and crucially, it's not correct. I think it's important to say that this is not a particularly good study. It's not a particularly helpful study. It asks people a question: is climate change exaggerated? 31% of the teenagers surveyed said yes. This should obviously raise the question: exaggerated by who? Now, if all of these people think that somebody like Donald Trump is exaggerating the effects of climate change, that's cause for concern. But that's almost certainly not the case. You're probably looking at who are the mainstream figures who are talking about climate change. Almost everybody supports very robust action to tackle it. And indeed, lots of very prominent people in this debate are gluing themselves to roads and saying that there's a climate apocalypse coming. If people think that those figures are saying that climate change is an exaggerated problem, they're absolutely right. And I wish it was more than 31%.
Yeah. I mean, Inaya...
Can I just come... just building up on that point, if you look at one of the founders of Extinction Rebellion, Roger Hallam, he wrote a blog post that said, "A message to young people as they face annihilation." For a lot of people, that is not the kind of messaging that we should be saying to young people. That is not realistic. I would argue that that's misinformation, promoting fear and anxiety about different challenges that people face. I think that why is there only one side that is framed as perpetuating exaggerated misinformation? I think is often some fringe figures within the climate debate also.
I'm just going to challenge you on that. I think that on both sides of the debate, there are people who take the end spectrums. And that's important because we need to know what you are facing at one end and what the best possible scenario is at the other. What we need to do is to recognise the lens through which that comes. We need to give young people the tools to be able to look at it and say, this is one end of the spectrum, this is the other, and maybe I lie somewhere in the middle. But I think the consequence of what we need them to do is to feel empowered to take some action about it.
Yeah, and
that's what Roger Hallam is trying to do.
OK, I mean, there was criticism of Extinction Rebellion. You're part of Extinction Rebellion Youth. How would you respond to what Inaya said?
I think that, yes, some people may see what Roger's saying, but I think that's beside the point, quite frankly.
But is it
the science is very clear. The science is something to be scared of. But it's about how do we decide to address it. So I can say I have big emotions around the climate science. The climate science is saying we need some really robust change before the year 2030, or there's a lot of stuff that might not be able to go back on. And I think we need to recognise that, and we need to go with what the scientists say and act appropriately. I think going into all this, whether this person's right or this, it's beside the point, because at this point, we've got something that is really big and really major that as a society we need to sort, and we need to be prioritised and look for that.
I don't think it is beside the point, because these are the figures that are actually representing and shaping the discussion and influencing what people think about it. And there's a former Extinction Rebellion spokesperson, her name is Zion Lights, actually left Extinction Rebellion because she thought that they were slowing down progress on a lot of issues that didn't back nuclear, and now they are backing nuclear. Now she is backing nuclear because she thinks it is really important to actually getting some real action. So oftentimes when you are scaremongering, when you are fearmongering, you are slowing down progress on change because you are looking for this perfect solution rather than the little steps that lots of us can take that actually can move us forward.
Yeah, and Daisy, do you worry about the fact that, say, a few years ago, people like you would argue with climate change deniers? You won that argument with the science. And now it's a different sort of opposition. It's a sort of opposition that are sort of challenging the approach, challenging the effects, challenging the messages that are put out by something like Extinction Rebellion. That's sort of harder to battle against. Do you recognise that and do you worry that?
It's not denial now, it's delayalism. It's this idea of we can actually delay thinking about the climate crisis, you know, and that's particularly scary when we know the science has given us deadlines. So I think it's, yeah, we have to kind of see this as we can't delay it. We have to act now. We can have these conversations. I think it's really important to have conversations around what the solutions look like, how we're making sure that we're holding everyone through this journey. That is going to happen, whether we like it or not, in order to address the climate crisis.
Yeah, climate delayers, I think is what you said. I mean, are you a climate delayer?
I don't know, maybe I am in your reading of it, but I really challenge the use of this term, the science. So this climate science is, it deals with many, many complex variables, and like any science that deals with many complex variables, you're going to see a massive range of opinions on this. There is no the science. A 2017 literature review of what climate scientists, of studies that have been undertaken on what scientists predict would happen if we doubled the density of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. There was a massive range of opinion. Of 140 studies, 115 were within the range of it would increase global temperatures an average of 1.5 degrees all the way up to 4.5 degrees, with the remaining studies on either side of those things. That is a massive difference, and it's vitally important.
But what we can't deny is that last year was the hottest year on record, and the Met Office predict that this year is going to be even hotter, or possibly. We can't deny that. That's happened.
Well, no one's denying that the climate is warming. It's just to what extent is that happening, and what do we need to do to sort it? And by the way, that's not just a scientific question. That's also economic, philosophical and political.
Absolutely, but I just want to challenge you on the science. The range that you've given, 1.5, is pretty disastrous. 4.5 is effectively the annihilation scenario for most human beings. So that range actually is very, very worrying. But there is a scientific consensus built up through the UN framework on climate change and the IPCC reports. So when people talk about the science, by and large, climate scientists are agreed that bad things are coming. There may be scenarios at one end or the other of the range, but people know how bad it's going to be. But you're absolutely right that what it requires is not just a scientific change. It requires cultural and political and social and a huge range of changes that need to underlie that. And we have to begin this conversation in a much more civilised way than saying, you're not telling the truth, you're not telling the truth. We've got to actually get round a table.
I wholeheartedly agree, and this concept of new denial that is contained within this study is a great way to tarnish people who disagree with the dominant narrative on climate change as climate deniers. You take a concept like climate change denial that any thinking person opposes and you try and tarnish them with that label. That's what this study effectively does by creating this new type of climate denialism.
And I think another reason why I think an increasing proportion of young people are sceptical, I mean, when you see a lot of the climate discussion, you hear racial justice is climate justice, or, women's rights is climate justice, or the conflict in Israel-Palestine and taking some position is also climate justice. When you actually, for a lot of people, it almost feels like a new religion where so many different issues are being kind of melted into one. And if you don't agree with a whole set of belief systems, then you are a climate denier. That is undoubtedly going to alienate people. Let's talk about specific problems and specific solutions, and then you can actually have a proper discussion about it.
I just don't really feel that that's true, if I'm honest with you, or at least my form of truth. My form of truth is informed by the fact that I'm a black woman living in this world, and that is going to affect the way that I look at the climate crisis. And that's what we have to acknowledge. We're all coming from different points of the table. And I think telling someone that is actually denying their reality of the way that they see the climate crisis. The climate crisis can hold many different things, and us looking at it as just a thing that is based in carbon is a problem, because that's just not how we're going to find the solutions. And quite frankly, historically, that is not how we find the solutions.
And that is where we are going to have to leave it now. Thank you all very much indeed for coming in. Strong opinion in the studio, Holly.